Hello, my name is Marlene, and this is the story of my romance with Francis. I'm 68 years old and carry a collection of memories with me like pages from an old book. Some yellowed with time, others still damp with emotion. For many years, my life revolved around one person, Raymond, my husband. We met when I still wore braids and believed love was something straight out of the movies. But with him, I discovered love could be quiet like a rainy Sunday, yet deep like the smell of fresh coffee in the morning. When he passed, nearly 3 years ago, it felt as though someone had ripped the final chapter out of my book. The story lost its meaning. Mornings grew colder, and the days longer. Friends and family tried to comfort me, saying the pain would ease with time. But no one teaches you what to do with the silence that lingers once the person you loved is no longer there to comment on a movie or laugh at a failed cake recipe. It was my granddaughter, Nora, who told me about a volunteer spot at the local library. "Grandma, you love books. It'll do you good." And it did. Not right away, I admit. At first, I just wanted a place where no one would look at me with pity. A space where I could spend hours among shelves, touching worn covers, reading the past of others. Sorting old books was a calm, almost therapeutic task, the kind of thing that fills your time without asking too much of you. There, between a forgotten poetry collection and a love story from the 60s, I learned to breathe slowly again. I began to notice that the world kept moving, even if I felt stuck inside. Some days, I would simply sit by the reading room window and watch people come and go, each carrying their own silences, urgencies, and little joys. One day, I found a dedication hidden on a yellowed page in a book of old essays. It read, "For those who read slowly, but feel quickly." I stood still, staring at those words as if they were meant for me, because that's exactly how I felt, like someone who still felt too much, even after everything. Being around people, again, even without saying much, was the first step. I felt that somehow, the library welcomed me without asking questions. No one there needed to know my story. It was enough just to be there, useful, present, alive. And it was in that chosen silence, among pages and memories, that something unexpected began to happen. I wasn't looking for change. In fact, I was hiding from it. But life, that old storyteller, seems to have a strange habit of turning the page when we least expect it. And that's exactly what it did to me, even if I didn't know it yet. For now, I just wanted to stay right there, with my volunteer badge and my quiet routine. No rush, just the gentle hope that maybe, just maybe, my story still had chapters left to be written. The first time he walked into the library, I barely noticed. It was just another Tuesday, and my hands were dusty from sorting old books for restoration. But he approached slowly, almost shyly, holding a red-covered novel. "Ma'am, could you help me find more love stories like this one?" he asked, with a gentle smile and a curious look. I found it sweet how he said, "ma'am," with a kind of respect that felt like it belonged to another time. I thanked him for the formality, joking, "You can call me Marlene. Ma'am is my mother." He laughed, a soft, unhurried laugh that seemed to fill the air. And then came a routine that, at first, felt casual. He came every Tuesday, always with a new question about romance novels. "Is there a story about fresh starts?" he asked one time. Another day, he wanted something about late-in-life love. And I, so used to answering with titles and authors, began to notice how he listened. It was as if he was searching for more than just printed words, as if, somehow, he was also listening to my voice. I started looking forward to his visits. In that library where time felt suspended, counting Tuesdays became a quiet joy. He always wore the same gray wool coat, slightly worn at the elbows, and carried a small notebook in his pocket. One day, I asked, "Do you jot down what you read?" And he replied, "No, I write down how the books make me feel." I stayed quiet for a few seconds. I felt a shiver run up my arm, and it wasn't the air conditioning. He never really spoke about himself, at least not directly. But there was something in his presence that didn't need explanation. When he sat by the window, flipping through pages like someone stroking a memory, I'd catch myself watching him from afar, trying to guess what was going on inside. Sometimes we exchanged quick glances. It felt like saying, "I'm here," without using words. If this story has touched you in any way so far, go ahead and like the video and subscribe to the channel. It shows me it's worth continuing to tell stories like this, quiet stories that somehow stay with us forever. One morning, I set aside a novel he hadn't read yet. When he arrived, I handed it to him and said, "I think you'll enjoy this one. It has a beautiful ending, but not an obvious one." He looked at me and said, "A beautiful and not so obvious ending? Sounds promising, like certain people." My heart stumbled inside my chest, but I smiled, pretending it was just another line among many. Still, that sentence echoed inside me the rest of the day. Everything was so subtle. No confessions, no bold gestures, just the gentle repetition of a presence. He came, he asked, he listened. I answered, I suggested, I felt. Gradually, the library was no longer. It was becoming the backdrop to something I couldn't quite name, but that made me go home with a quiet smile and a new desire to live through another Tuesday. The following Tuesday, he showed up earlier than usual. His hair was a little tousled, and he carried not one, but 2 books. One of them was a novel I had recommended. The other was a collection of love letters. "This one made me think about a lot of things," he said, placing them on the table. "Have you ever read a letter that made you cry?" The question caught me off guard. I smiled but didn't answer right away, sensing that the conversation was about to cross the line between books and real life. We started talking more than usual. He asked questions, but now he also shared. Slowly, I began to learn bits and pieces of his life. His name was Francis. He was 63, and like me, he was a widower. He told me he had worked for years as a history teacher, but had taken early retirement due to an illness he didn't name. "You learn how quickly time moves when you start losing the people that matter," he said quietly, gazing out the window. I knew exactly what he meant. Yes, we talked about books, but they soon became a bridge to talk about ourselves. One day he mentioned a novel where 2 characters reunite after decades apart. "Do you believe 2 people can find each other later in life and still make sense together?" he asked. I looked at him, hesitated, and said only, "I think so. But it takes courage." He nodded, and the silence that followed said more than any words could. I no longer pretended his presence was just another one. I waited for our conversations with a quiet excitement, the kind that warms you from the inside out. Sometimes he'd tell me stories from his youth, about backpacking through Latin America, or falling in love with French music because of an old girlfriend. She left, but Piaf stayed, he joked, and I laughed, really laughed, in a way I hadn't for a long time. Our meetings took on the taste of subtle intimacy. There was a tenderness in how he listened to me, a rare kind of attention. One day, I shared a memory of Raymond. He used to write me little notes and hide them around the house. Once he slipped one into the coffee bag. Francis listened with his eyes and heart. "He must have loved you very much," he said, with such warmth that I had to take a deep breath not to tear up. That's when I realized the books were just the gateway. He wasn't just coming for them. He was coming because he wanted to be there, with me. He wanted to hear my voice, share his memories, keep me company. And I, though I hadn't admitted it yet, had started allowing myself to be part of that exchange. I began to understand that maybe he too was waiting for someone, waiting for a new chapter. And without either of us saying it out loud, we were writing that chapter together, slowly, gently, like learning how to love again, 1 page at a time. It was on a cloudy morning, the kind where the light filters through the window softly, as if the day itself wants to move slowly, that he arrived different. It wasn't his clothes or his walk. It was his gaze, firmer, more direct, as if he'd been rehearsing something for days. I was reorganizing a shelf of American authors when he appeared beside me, quietly. He just looked at me. "Do you have a minute?" he asked, voice slightly lower than usual. I nodded, a little confused. I put down the book in my hands and followed him to one of the tables in the back, the ones hardly anyone used. He sat down and, for a few seconds, said nothing, just ran a hand through his hair, like he was lining up his thoughts before releasing them. "Marlene, I love coming here because of the books, of course, but I love what's outside the books even more, like you, for example." The sentence fell into the air like a leaf drifting slowly from a branch. I stood still. My first reaction was to smile, shyly, but inside my heart tightened, not from pain, but from a good kind of jolt, like when you stumble across an old photograph hidden among forgotten papers. "Francis," was all I managed to say at first. He looked down, almost as if apologizing. "Sorry if I was too direct. It's just, I've gotten used to the sound of your voice, the way you calmly speak, the way you pick out books for me like you somehow know what I need." And I know it might seem too soon or strange, but I think you're the most beautiful thing in this entire library. I felt my eyes well up. And it wasn't just emotion. It was fear, too. Fear of believing. Fear of making room again. Fear of letting the story begin anew. I took a deep breath, trying to settle the memories that stirred within me. Francis, you know my heart's been quiet for a long time. I wasn't expecting this anymore. He nodded. Neither was I. The silence that followed was unlike any of the others we'd shared. It wasn't awkward. It was a silence. That said, now we know. Now we don't need to pretend it's just about books. I returned to the shelf with trembling hands. I touched the books like someone trying to hold on to something familiar. But inside, something had already shifted. With that simple sentence, Francis had done more than express a feeling. He had given me back the sense of being seen, of being wanted, of being important. That morning I realized love sometimes arrives just like that, unannounced, without fanfare, just with the truth of a look and the courage of a sentence that could never be found in any book. The library felt especially quiet that afternoon. I don't know if it was the muffled sound of the rain outside or the quickened rhythm of my own heart that made time feel slower. I was alone between the shelves, organizing a section of American poetry, when I sensed his presence before even seeing him. Francis approached gently, as if honoring not just the quiet of the library, but mine too. "Hey, Marlene," he said, in that voice that always felt like an invitation to calm. I looked over my shoulder and smiled, though my smile came a bit more restrained than usual. I was still wrapped in the conversation from the week before, in that phrase of his that kept echoing in me. "I love what's outside the books, like you." He stood beside me, his eyes roaming the titles, though it felt like all his attention was on me. "Need help with these?" he asked, pointing to the stacked books on the floor. I shook my head. "No, I've got it under control." But he was already crouching down to grab one. "Still, I like being close by," he said. And there, between the narrow shelves and the scent of aging paper, it happened. There was no warning, no soundtrack, just a moment when our hands brushed while reaching for the same book. Our eyes met, and before either of us could say anything, he leaned in, slowly, as if asking permission through silence alone. The kiss was gentle, almost tentative, but within it, there was an ancient truth, as if that tenderness had lived between us for a long time, just waiting to be uncovered. It was a soft touch, but deep. One of those kisses that doesn't try to impress, only to reveal. I felt the warmth of his hand at my waist, and the sweet smell of paper all around us. I closed my eyes for a second, and when I opened them again, I realized I had forgotten to be afraid. When we pulled apart, still close, he looked at me with the kind of expression that holds something important, but chooses to let the gesture speak. "Sorry if I was too forward," he whispered, and I, with a trembling voice, replied, "Don't apologize for something beautiful." For a few seconds we stayed there, wrapped in shelves and memories. It was as if the outside world didn't exist, as if it was just the two of us, suspended between past and future, touching a present that surprised us both. I returned to work after he left, but my hands no longer moved, with the same certainty. I picked up a random book and held it against my chest. The library was the same, the books, the smell, but I wasn't exactly the same anymore. That kiss, so simple, so sincere, had awakened something in me that I thought time had long put to rest. And deep inside, something whispered, maybe this is just the first paragraph of a brand new chapter. In the days that followed that kiss between the shelves, everything inside me felt more awake. The mornings no longer carried that same heavy silence. There was a new kind of waiting, a light, almost imperceptible kind, like when you know you'll see an old friend again and find yourself rehearsing what to say, even though you know silence would already be enough. Francis came back the next Tuesday, like always, but something had changed between us, and it wasn't just the kiss, it was the way he looked at me, slower, softer, like someone who recognizes a part of himself in the other. We sat together in the back of the library and spoke very little. He flipped through a book and from time to time made a quiet remark. "This author writes like she's holding hands with sorrow," he said, showing me a page, and I replied, "Sometimes that's how we walk after loss, hand in hand with sorrow until it turns into memory." Being with him was unlike anything I had experienced, even with Raymond. With Francis, there was no rush, no pressure, just presence. Still, Inside, I carried a quiet fear of fooling myself, fear that it was all too fleeting. "Do you think we still know how to love after so much time?" I asked one afternoon, almost without thinking. He looked at me sweetly and said, "I think love never forgets. We just need to relearn the way back to it." The truth is, I was rediscovering everything. The touch, the companionship, the shared silences, even my reflection in the mirror. I started getting ready a bit more before leaving the house. I began wearing burgundy lipstick I hadn't used since my 50s, and it wasn't vanity. It was the desire to feel alive again, inside and out. Of course, not everything was easy. Sometimes I caught myself comparing Francis to Raymond, and that made me feel guilty. But I learned to be gentle with myself. I realized love isn't a replacement. It's a new story. And every love that passes through us teaches a different way of being whole. Francis never pressured me. He seemed to understand my pace. Sometimes he would simply hold my hand and say, "It's okay, Marlene. We've got time." And I believed him. Because for the first time in a long time, someone didn't want to fix me. They just wanted to walk beside me. Rediscovering love after 60 felt like rereading a book I thought I knew. The words were still there, but the meaning, the meaning had changed. And in that new reading, I found not just a man. I found myself lighter, more open, braver. There was no official relationship talk, no grand promises. What grew between Francis and me blossomed naturally, like those little plants that sprout through cracks in concrete, silent, persistent, and somehow more beautiful because of it. Our Tuesday meetings continued as always, in the library, between old books and new conversations. But now, there was one tiny difference: the coffee. Every week he showed up with 2 small paper cups from the bakery on the corner. "Sweetened with affection," he'd say, laughing at his own pun, and I accepted it, even though I preferred mine unsweetened, because the gesture warmed me more than the drink. We started sitting right there beside the poetry shelf. He'd read aloud and ask me what I thought, and I'd answer, not just with words, but with my gaze, with the tilt of my head, with that smile that only shows up when the soul feels at peace. We talked about everything, except the future. We never made plans, never mapped anything out, but every time he said, "See you Tuesday," I knew he'd be back, and he knew I'd be there. It was presence without demand, a kind of love that doesn't cling, only embraces. I learned that maturity teaches us this, to love without rushing, without needing control, but with surrender. One day he told me he was learning to cook, just simple dishes, but if you're up for it, I can make you some garlic rice, seasoned with French music, he joked. And I replied, "If Piaf's playing, you're halfway there already." We laughed a lot, and in that shared laughter was more intimacy than in many kisses. On holidays, he came by even without needing books. "Just came to see you," he'd say, in that calm way I already recognized from afar. I started waiting for him, not just on Tuesdays, but in life. And I realized that love after 60 doesn't have to be euphoria. It can be steadiness. It can be that cup of coffee someone remembers to bring because they know your taste. Even if you never said it out loud. We never spoke of moving in together, never made long-term plans. But he helped with groceries, carried my bags, fixed the leaky faucet, and I hemmed his pants, baked cakes on weekends, and left little notes tucked inside the books he borrowed. "Sweet chapter ahead," I wrote in one of them. And so, between old books and shared coffee, we wrote our own love story. No titles, no scripts, just 2 hearts, seasoned by time, choosing to meet at the right moment. And if anyone ever asks me whether it's still worth falling in love after 60, I'll say, yes, it is, because love has no age. All it needs is space, courage, and someone who, with a simple, "See you Tuesday," makes you want to live every day that follows. If you made it this far, it's because you felt it. Did you feel how love can be reborn? Between silences, between pages, between 2 simple cups of coffee? Then please, if this story stirred something inside you, if it made you remember someone, or dare to dream again, subscribe to the channel and leave a like, not just to support this kind of content, but to say, I believe too, that it's never too late.